Hello, it's Patricia Warby, Alchemy Therapies here, and I'd like to talk today about the power of unconscious processing and why it's so very important in health and healing. Now, first of all, what do I mean by the unconscious? Well, it's parts of your brain that have no awareness of themselves. Okay, because that's the definition of consciousness, after all, is awareness of awareness. I like that definition. I think it's really important. It's like a meta awareness, if you like. It's, I guess, linked to how you feel about yourself, how you identify yourself, how the fact that you know you're the observing I, the ego. But there are parts of the brain that have no connection with language, with logic, with that kind of self identity. And they are more back brain or midbrain parts of your operation. And they're really, really important for communicating from the body to the mind and back and forth in that lovely loop, what we call the mind body connection. Now, when I first wrote my book, Mind Medicine, which was last year in 2024, I talked a lot about this because I felt that the power of the unconscious mind had not really been properly explored. What we have seen is an explosion recently of neurological brain training courses and books and all sorts of ways in which you can retrain your brain to unlink the stress loop, which tends to run on, a habitual program, particularly if you've had a difficult emotional bonding with parents or a disruption in bonding or attachment early on in your life through no fault of your own. Maybe birth trauma, maybe something happened at school, or you had an accident, or you just weren't given what you needed. I know it possibly sounds a little easy to say, because all of us have times when we're not given what we needed. But if that doesn't happen reliably and you happen to be highly sensitive, those emotional wounds, that feeling of unsafety gets communicated into the unconscious, and it kind of programs your physiology in such a way that you are much more prone to stress responses. And that includes, elevated heart rate, dysregulated gut function, suppressed immunity, and of course, repressed emotions. And look, there is a lot of controversy around this because I know when I begin to talk about why emotions are important, people are often put off. They think that I'm saying it's all in your head, you're making it up, you're just being too sensitive, you need to cheer up and get with the program. And actually, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that these unconscious sense impressions, what we call implicit memories, are actually really, really important for guiding and controlling your physiological responses. And if you get a threat in later life, whether that's through a divorce or a financial loss, or perhaps you lose your job, the same processes that were initiated when you first had that experience, usually in childhood, are re-evoked, what we call re-triggering in the life, and the responses in the body are identical. But what tends to happen is they're cumulative. So you end up having not only the responses to what's currently going on, but the responses that you had when you were little and didn't have the support you needed. And so they can be completely overwhelming. But because they're unconscious, you're not even aware you're having them. You don't have an emotional response necessarily. You may be upset for a while, but then something strange begins to happen. So you start to get symptoms in the body which seem completely unrelated. You might get tension, you might get pain, you might get grumbling gut function, things you're not digesting as well. You may get interrupted sleep, like insomnia, waking early and not feeling refreshed when you wake up. You might suddenly come out in skin rashes. You may get frequent infections. UTIs, for instance, are very, very common because of the suppressed immunity. It's as if your body is speaking to you in the only language it has, which is through symptomology, controlled by the nervous system, which of course is dysregulated at this point. And so in order to reverse these situations, we need to get into the unconscious part of your brain that feels threatened, it feels unsafe, it feels overwhelmed. And there's no good talking to someone about that. There's no good saying, you just need to notice you're fine. What are you worrying about? A lot of my clients say that they feel bad. They add shame into the mix because they feel bad that they're suffering when other people have things so much worse than they do. But it's not a competition, folks. It's not that you're judging by anyone else. You should only really judge by how you feel inside. And if you're getting symptoms, it's very likely that your body feels like it's unsafe at some level. Now, in the book, I talked about the mind and body being one, and how it's an unconscious connection, because the part of the nervous system that connects you is not your sensory part, it's your autonomic or automatic nervous system. And this goes on without your knowledge, without your conscious control, because it controls all the functions in your body that you don't want to be having to think about: your digestion, your breathing, your heart rate. And so they have a very clear connection. And in order to change the response pattern that you're getting, we need to intervene and somehow create a sense of safety in the system. And the best way of communicating that is through the senses, through touch, sight, and sound in particular. And so I wanted to really articulate how that happens. Now, I went to study hypnotherapy back when it wasn't particularly well known. In fact, I'd always dismissed it as being a bit hokey, a bit of a party trick. And I discovered actually many, many symptoms can be reversed and certainly improved through this access to unconscious process, which in hypnotherapy, you usually use the eyes, or you use sound through the voice modulation, and you tune into the power of the imagination to change the program. Now, that does sound strange when you come through the biomolecular model, that the standard model that medicine uses, that, something is only real if it's physical and you can kind of measure it. And actually, when you're looking at the unconscious process, there's no way of measuring that. The only thing you can measure is the result when you change the program. And so it's really important to understand that the unconscious talks in parables, if you like. It talks in imaginary scenarios. And so when we go in to change the program, we don't just tell somebody, let go of that problem. We give them a vision of what life would be like without the problem. We help to create positive imagination, which after all is creating a future possibility, as the next step. And if we do it well, if we now enable someone to feel safe in that moment, they're held, and we ask them to create this future scenario in which they don't have the problem because they've solved the underlying issue. And we don't need to know what the underlying issue is particularly. We can work just through giving the unconscious the information it's lacking, and it will do the rest. Because make no mistake about it, your unconscious records everything that's ever happened to you. And so actually it does know what the issues are, even if you don't, even if your conscious awareness isn't at all up on this. Your unconscious knows what you need. And so all we do is we lead people into an imaginary space where we create the opportunities for the unconscious to insert what's needed. And so, for instance, there's one that I use called roadblock. And we imagine you're driving along in a fabulous car and you see something in the road and it's in the way of you proceeding. And we might describe it as a rock, or we could say it's a barrier or a boulder. But we let the unconscious put in the details, because the details are really important, because they signify something about the roadblock or the barrier that is actually present in reality. And so if it's some people have said, well, that's my parent standing in the road. It's a parent. How surprising. Because that's how their unconscious perceives the problem, is that the parent told them something or demonstrated something when they were little that told them that the path they want to go down isn't acceptable. And so this is how we kind of intervene in this. We use a very, very suggestive frame of mind, which creates, interestingly, an altered brain state. Because when you're focused on everyday life, okay, you're very much in what's called beta or beta brainwave states, which are reasonably fast. If we slow that down and bring you into an imaginary frame, everything starts to slow down. All the brainwaves start to slow down. And it's very much more like just before you're going to fall asleep at night when you're really dozy. It's that kind of state we want to get to, because that's where the power is of reformulating your brain state so that it begins to believe in an imaginary future rather than the present that you're currently experiencing, which of course is based on the past. So we're trying to shift the time frame into the ability to create a possibility in your future state by accentuating your imaginary power in the now. And so the imagination is a really powerful tool, actually. And of course, we're talking to different parts of you here. We're not talking to your conscious and cognitive ability. We may ask for the cooperation of your cognition by asking, does the conscious awareness agree with this? And we can find maybe that in some cases there's a bit of resistance. And we work with that without attacking it. We understand that in order to feel really balanced in our nervous system, we have to use both left and right sides of the brain. In fact, the brain needs that integration. And normally when we're perceiving something, it's the right hemisphere that perceives it first, passes it over to the left, and then the left passes it back to the right. And that is very powerful because it's like a fail-safe system. So the right perceives the bigger picture, it's kind of the imagination, it's kind of the overall awareness. The left narrows it down, focuses, what do I need to do here? It's very grasping, it's very narrow. And then once it's got what it needs, it can then pass it back to the right hemisphere, which can integrate the two. And so we have to get out of this fear of illness and our symptoms in order to be able to access our imaginary right hemispherical ability, not only to create a future possibility, but to help integrate the entire whole into a functional and adaptive self. Because if you're living in fear, you'll be largely in a left hemisphere frame. You'll be worrying, you'll be hypervigilant, you'll be focusing endlessly on your symptoms. Probably the first thing you think of when you wake up is what doesn't feel right, what's changed. And we need to get you to feeling what's good, what works, what am I grateful for? And that's not easy to do if we just tell you. We really have to get you into this, I'm going to use the word fantasy, the creation of a future possibility as if it is happening now. Now, if you'd have told me any of this 10 or 15 years ago, I would have probably laughed, or I certainly would have dismissed what you're saying as being really, really unproven and largely, kind of the thing that maybe only stupid or idiotic people would believe, because I was trained in the scientific method, which said, unless you can kind of read hundreds of trials on it, then maybe it isn't real or it isn't proven. But what I found is that things like hypnotherapy they have a really, really good research base, but because they're not integrated into the medical model, the biomolecular model, they're largely ignored. And you'll only read about them in very select journals which deal with maybe alternative psychology. It's not even admitted into the mainstream of psychology. And so it's not that the evidence isn't there, it's just that it's not taught. And so people who, like me, go through a medical or biomolecular training don't actually learn any of it. And so they're not sure. But I am very inspired recently to find that more and more medically trained doctors are coming around to this idea of the mind-body connection. And in fact, I know already of somebody very local to me who's a medical doctor training in hypnotherapy, which she wants to add into her practice. So look, it is beginning to be combined. We are beginning to look at the integrative model rather than this sort of focus on chemistry and molecules. Not everything is faulty chemistry. It's certainly it can have that result, but it isn't where these problems begin. They largely begin in your unconscious process. And so if any of this sounds interesting to you, I really, please subscribe, because this helps, it helps the algorithm of my channel. But also check out my book, Mind Medicine. And, there's so much more in there to discover, and may just change your experience of life. So look, folks, if you want to find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk. And for now, take care. Bye-bye.